multiple trade deals to safeguard our prosperity, not just with the EU, but with the United States and many other countries. Some observers fear it might be too much for the system itself. I'm joined now in his last few days as Brexit Secretary by Steve Barclay. Steve Barclay, before I start, do you end this week on the back benches?
Well, we've got a cabinet meeting away day where I'm presenting a paper, so that will be the focus this week.
Fingers crossed, therefore, for another job.
Well, we've got a busy week, and obviously the machinery of government changes are coming in due course.
I'll come on to those in a bit more detail in a moment, but the coronavirus, there has been a suggestion, well, the Foreign Office have said that people inside Wuhan province must try and get out, British people, if they can. But given that all the airports and roads are being closed, how can they get out? Are we therefore going to go in with some kind of airlift to get them out?
Well, Cobra met on Friday and the FCO have issued updated guidance. We've tested here 31 people. All of those tests have come back negative. So we're closely monitoring the situation as things develop, and the FCO has issued that guidance in the interim.
2,000 people came in from Wuhan into Heathrow and were given leaflets telling them what to do if they felt ill. How many of those people have we actually traced?
Well, we've tested 31. We're reaching out through
2,000.
We've tested 31 so far. We've been reaching out, and that is ongoing at the moment. And we're fortunate in that we have many of the world experts in this field here in the UK that are obviously informing our approach. So work is going on that, and obviously if people have symptoms, they should report it. But the tests so far have all proved negative.
It does sound possible that we are carefully and slowly bolting the stable door long after the horse has gone.
No, and I think that's why Cobra met very quickly. The policy has been informed by many of the world experts in this field. Today, all the tests have proved negative, but it's right that we monitor it closely, Andrew.
Okay, so simple, obvious question. There are lots of British people stuck in Wuhan. We heard on the news from one of them. How are they supposed to get out? The Foreign Office is saying get out. If we're not going to get them out ourselves, how are they supposed to get out?
Well, it's a fast-moving situation. It is one
they're not fast-moving.
It is one that we're monitoring, and obviously the FCO is working with the Chinese authorities in that regard.
So is an airlift a possibility that we are looking at?
Well, we'll continue, as I say, to monitor it, to test anyone who's come back to ensure that those tests come back without any positive results. And the FCO continues to monitor that. So it is something that is fast-moving and we're keeping in progress.
And it's a possibility, an airlift?
Well, we'll keep it under review.
Okay. All right, let's turn to trade. Because obviously everything is going to change in government. Your department is vanishing. There's going to be a new international trade department. In your view, is it the right thing for Britain to conduct trade negotiations with the United States and other so-called Tier 1 countries at the same time as we're trying to do it with the EU?
Yes, it is. We want to signal the commitment to trade, to normalise the approach through the free trade, to take back control in terms of our trade policy. And I think that's one of the real opportunities that we have after the 31st of January, that we will have control of our approach to trade. And I think it's extremely welcome that so many countries, including the US, want to reach trade agreements with the UK and want to work at pace.
Doing all of this at the same time is obviously going to be very, very difficult. Should it all be done from inside one super trade department? In other words, are we going to bring in all the best people from around Whitehall and indeed the private sector together to do this? Because it's a massive, massive job for government.
Well, it will be a whole of government approach. And that is why, for example, a lot of the expertise within the DEXU department will be socialised across Whitehall into specific departments to take the expertise that's been acquired in recent years into the relevant departments. But in terms of the wider machinery of government, as you know, there will be a major announcement on that, and the Prime Minister will set out more on that in due course.
The Chancellor has already said that there is going to be divergence in a whole set of areas. Does that mean that as a country we are now in effect giving up on frictionless trade?
Well, we're coming out of the single market, we're coming out of the customs union. We're not going to diverge just for the sake of it. We need to look at where the opportunities are. But it is true that we are going to have control of our approach to regulation. And that's the very essence of Brexit, is that we can do things differently, particularly where, for example, there's innovation, there's new technologies, there's things where we want to move quickly. So Brexit, at its very core, is that we will have control of our laws, our regulation, and that is why we can't be a rule taker. We need to have that opportunity.
But it's a fairly common sense view that if we're going to do this, we are not going to have frictionless trade as well.
Well, both sides are committed through the political declaration to having a zero tariffs, zero quotas free trade agreement. The Commission President, as you know, when she gave her speech at the LSE signalled her commitment to have a broad agreement. The EU have also signed up to the time frame in terms of the end of 2020 through the political declaration. So this is a win-win. This is about one side winning, one side losing. It's in both sides' interests to keep the flow of goods going. But both sides' businesses want that, and that's what we need to work on.
But the more we diverge, the more inevitable it is there will be some kinds of friction for British exporters. This is not an abstract conversation we're having, obviously, because all around Britain there are lots of people running businesses right now who desperately need to know the answers. Let me give you an example. 820,000 people are employed in the British car industry, very often in the Midlands and the northwest of England, the northeast of England, where the Conservatives have won all those jobs. Are those car companies going to have a different kind of regulatory regime after Brexit?
Well, it will be for the negotiations to tease out some of this detail. But the key issue is our commitment through the manifesto to high standards, high workers' rights, high environmental standards, high standards in terms of state aid. And you should look at where the UK has been. So, for example, on state aid, the UK has a far better record than, for example, Germany or France on issues like state aid. So we have high standards in the UK. Our manifesto was committed to maintaining those. And in the negotiations, we need to look at how we discuss that.
Nevertheless, if you can't even tell businesses now whether they should be preparing for frictionless trade or not, how can they possibly prepare? You say it'll be for the negotiations, but the EU, for instance, publishes its proposals, its plan publicly, and they're going to do that next month. Are we going to do the same?
Yes, we're going to publish our objectives for the negotiation, and we will set that out. Now, the key issue, in due course after the 31st, so there'll be a speech from the Prime Minister after the 31st setting that out. But the key issue is that we will have control of our rules. We will not be a rule taker. We will not diverge for the sake of diverging. We start from a position of alignment. But the key opportunity is that we will be able to set our standards, high standards on workers' rights, on the environment, on state aid, as part of that trade policy.
And to be absolutely clear, we're going to know next month, early February, what Britain's objectives in these trade negotiations are going to be. It's going to be out there publicly for everyone to see.
Well, we'll set more detail out next month in terms of the objectives for the negotiation. But above all, that is set out in the political declaration. The objective is to have a zero tariff, zero quota, broadly ambitious trade policy, but to do that in parallel with our talks with the rest of the world, and in particular with the US.
Let's turn, well, you mentioned the US there. One of the obvious overarching problems is that we want to do a really good trade deal with the United States. Indeed, we need to do a really good trade deal with the United States, and yet we have lots of arguments with them. And there is an obvious sort of philosophical question, therefore, as to how we conduct ourselves vis-à-vis the White House. I mentioned at the beginning of the programme. In that context, what about Huawei? Because there's some very, very powerful pieces by some of your colleagues, Conservative MPs, in the press today, arguing that we have to get out of this Huawei deal while we still can.
Well, the approach to 5G needs to be informed by the evidence. Obviously, we will control what we do in terms of the security approach. That will be a decision for the National Security Council. But the key issue in terms of the US trade deal is the clear intent of the administration, the Trump administration, to have a trade deal with the UK. They've been very clear in terms of how they prioritise that, they want to have that deal. So yeah, there's issues in terms of 5G, but that is a UK decision in terms of our security approach.
But also, they threaten us when it comes to the digital tax, for instance, 2% digital tax, which I assume is still government policy. Steve Munchkin, the relevant State Department official, has said that if we do that, then they will start to impose tariffs on our car exports to the United States. In other words, we're quite close to a tit-for-tat situation. And in this situation, as we leave the EU, we have much, much less power.
Well, it's always been the case that tax policy is decided by the Chancellor, and that continues. Now, the best way to address the digital tax issue is through international agreements. Now, we're all concerned as to how long that has been taken, but that is the optimum way to address this. But it is, of course, a UK sovereign decision as to where we set our tax policy. So
we could do what the French have done, for instance, which is they have delayed their 3% tax, and they said, let's leave it to the OECD, let's leave it to those international obligations, those international negotiations, because it's really important that this is a global decision. Could we do the same?
Well, we think the best way forward is through a global decision, but we're concerned as to the amount of time that has been taken. And it's important that people have confidence in the tax system, that they think that it is fair, that companies are paying their fair way. But that is an issue for the Chancellor to balance, and that is a UK decision.
Final US-UK decision question. Anne Secoulas, have we given up on getting her extradited?
No, we haven't. We're very disappointed by that. The Business Secretary, both as constituency MP and the Foreign Secretary, have both expressed their disappointment. We continue to work on that because we feel it is denying the family justice for her not to return to answer the questions that obviously they have.
OK, I keep throwing them at you, but one other agonisingly difficult decision is HS2. Arguments pro and anti right across the press. You've got different parts of the Conservative Party at war over this. What are you going to do?
Well, we've got a clear commitment to level up all parts of the United Kingdom. That was a big part of our commitment at the general election.
Which requires HS2.
High Speed 2 plays an important part in that. But it's important we also get value for money. That is why the National Audit Office have been looking at this. It's also why we commissioned the additional review to look at the concerns in terms of the costs. But above all, we've got a very clear commitment to level up all parts of the UK. And one of the opportunities that Brexit does is it gives us the freedom to move on from what has been a very divisive debate in recent years and to shift forward into the prioritisation of things like the investment in our NHS, the extra police officers and transport infrastructure.
Well, Steve Barclay, you talk about divisive debates, but this is going to be divisive too, because you've got a project which appears to be spiralling out of control in cost. Started off 30 odd billion, it's now well over 100 billion, we're told, and it's running years and years late. There must come a point when, even if you want to level up, even if you're worried about the West Midlands and the north of England and connectivity, you have to think this is not worth it.
Well, that's why we've commissioned the additional review to look at those costs. It's why the Transport Secretary has committed to be very transparent in terms of those costs and setting those out. But above all, we have a strong commitment to levelling up all parts of the United Kingdom. High Speed 2 is a key part of that, not just from speed, but more from a capacity point of view in the line. And that is a very clear commitment we've given the North.
Gut feeling yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, gut feeling yes. Stephen Barclay, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Good luck later in the week. Thanks.